may find to be of interest. If you look over to the right, you're going to see a British swivel gun replica. So let me tell you the story of this. On July 16, 1781, during what later became known as the Dog Day Foray, there was an attack, a surprise attack at Louisville Plantation on the Cooper River, which is 2 or 3 miles downstream of Main Street in Monk's Corner today. Lieutenant Colonel Wade Hampton and his group surprised 2 vessels that were there at the plantation and burned and sank them. They were on their way that evening to rendezvous with Thomas Sumter, Francis Marion, Light Horse Harry Lee, and Henry Hampton to try to drive the British back to Charleston from the Monk's Corner area. The Louisville Plantation is still standing today, and you can see the house on the river. And just in front of the plantation was about a 35-foot row galley, a vessel that would have been a guard boat for the upper Cooper River. In 1985, 3 divers, having heard about this, went out to dive, and I'm going to tell you that the bottom there is silt, pretty much flat bottom, but diver bottom snout was going along. He said he went down kind of like a little depression, and there were ballast rocks, which would have been used to ballast the ship. And as he was crawling around there trying to figure out what he had, he apparently hit something or caught a hose on something or whatever. It was a trunnion of a 3-pounder British cannon right here. Now, South Carolina is one of the only states in the Union. I was talking to Dr. Smith a little earlier about, are there any other states that you're aware of that have the kind of circumstances that we have? And he said, well, maybe Florida and maybe Virginia did at one time or another. But South Carolina is one of the only states that allows divers to collect historic material from underwater, but they have to have a license, and they have to make quarterly reports, and they have to interact with the state. Now, a volunteer program like this is only as good as the honesty of the divers, the cooperation of the archaeologists, and their ability to dialogue. These divers raised this cannon, which technically they shouldn't have done without notifying the state, but I really think they're heroes because they immediately turned the cannon over to the state. What you see here is Bobby Snowden to the left, the man who found this cannon, Alan Albright, the first underwater archaeologist for South Carolina, next, and then Steve Thornhill and Don Ard. As they went down that day and they were digging a little around this cannon on the bottom underneath it, they found a swivel gun. Here's another shot of them. These shots are taken in Columbia. They were turning these cannons over to the state at the Browns Ferry Conservation Facility. Some of you from the Georgetown area may be familiar with the Browns Ferry vessel, a ship that was actually sunk probably around 1750 and was raised and conserved in this facility. Now, underneath the 3-pounder cannon, as they were digging around, they found the swivel gun. Probably most of you are familiar with these swivel guns. They weigh about 160 pounds, whereas the 3-pounders weigh a little over 600 pounds a piece. But this could be actually lifted and set up by one man if you're kind of hefty. You could put it on a stump, you could put it in some kind of a post on the ground, you could put it on the gunwale of a vessel. You could fire about a half-pound solid shot with it, or you could pack it full of rocks or nails or scrap metal or whatever and use it like a big shotgun. This is Curtis Peterson, who was a conservator for South Carolina back in the 80s. Here's a picture of the original swivel gun shortly after it was given to the lab, and you can see the kind of condition it was in. Actually, it's in really good condition. Anything like this that would come from salt water probably would really have a rough time surviving unless it got immediate attention with electrolytic cleaning and so forth. These came from fresh water up the Cooper River, so they had a better chance of survival. On the left, you see the swivel gun after it was had conservation. Actually, this is quite a few years after it had its conservation work in the 80s. I have done a lot of work with the Berkeley County Museum in Moncks Corner, and as we were preparing for the 250th, preparing for the opening of the Fort Farallon exhibit, the new trail going out to Fort Farallon and so forth, we wanted to update and design a nice Revolutionary War exhibit in the museum, and we wanted to tell the story of this shipwreck. The 3-pounder cannon that you saw had lain, I think from the early 2000s, it laid in the back room of the Berkeley Museum for about 20 years, and the conservation, it was holding up well, but it was not on display. And this swivel gun, I think the Institute of Archaeology and Anthropology would occasionally use it for some kind of temporary exhibit or whatever, but for the most part, I think it laid on the floor under a table outside the office of the underwater archaeologist for many years. I knew it was there, but we didn't have it in Berkeley County. To try to figure out what was going on, the first question was, who owns these cannons? Because we had no paperwork at the museum, or at least nobody knew. So we tried to track down, well, first of all, I found out that the state never made, and these divers never made a resolution as to who owned what. And the state was supposed to have given a share of the fines from the shipwreck to the divers, and that was never settled. So now we're talking about 2018 or so, and this came up, this was in 1985. So I tracked down Bobby Snowden here, and so we had a meeting with the state archaeologist, Jonathan Leader, at the time, state underwater archaeologist, Jim Spyrek, Bobby, and then 3 of us from the museum, and we all powwowed, and we agreed that all these cannons belong to the state, except the divers kind of have a share, but they agreed that if we were to give them each a replica of the swivel gun, they would relinquish any ownership to any artifacts. They really were heroes. They wanted this stuff to be on display in Berkeley County. And so I found out through Jim Legg, archaeologist at the Institute of Archaeology and Anthropology, about this young man, Ruben Alex Coclo. I believe he's from Argentina. Terrific fella, terrific artist in Bluffton, South Carolina. We carried this original swivel gun. You can see where I carried it down to Bluffton and left it with him. He made a mold, and then he made 3 resin casts. Now, if you took this swivel gun replica here and put it next to the original, unless you tried to heft it, you'd never know which one was the real one. The original weighs about 160 pounds. This one probably weighs about 5 pounds. Probably 2019 or so, we presented at the Berkeley Museum each of these 3 divers with their replica swivel gun from the Louisville wreck. Now, I'm just going to quickly tell you about the 3rd cannon. In 1986, the Institute of Archaeology and Anthropology brought their underwater team down. They did an underwater excavation on the shipwreck. They found a few more artifacts, but no more ordnance. A year or 2 later, Scott Fulkerson and Bobby Snowden, one of the original divers, went out there with an underwater metal detector. As they were going around outside the ship, they got a ping, or whatever you would call it, with the metal detector. And as they were digging down, they found another 3-pounder cannon out there. They raised it, turned it over to the state. The state did their conservation. And again, probably in the early 2000s, this cannon was, I guess, loaned, no paperwork or anything, but it sat in the Berkeley Museum. Now, this picture would have been taken probably 5 years ago or so, 2018, something like that. you can see that somebody at the museum probably did a pretty nice job of making a naval-type carriage for it. But have you ever heard that the British painted their carriages red, so that there was blood on the deck, whatever, you know, whatever, you know. I don't think they use fire engine red. But at any rate, this sat in the museum like this, but you'll also see saran wrap wrapped around the barrel. Over the years, this cannon was not holding up. And they said that school kids would come and they would kind of pick at the rust and whatnot. And so somebody at the museum, prior to my being involvement, said, well, best thing we can do is put saran wrap around the barrel. Well, when we got to looking at making our display, we said, we got to do something better than this. So I contacted a conservator that's a friend of mine at the Hunley Lab, the Warren Lash Conservation Lab. And they came down and looked at it, gave us a bid. Now, of course, our museum operates on fumes. We don't have a lot of money. But we were able to get an accommodations tax grant through Berkeley County and send this cannon to the Hunley Lab. If you look all the way on the left, you'll see it sitting there with the original coating on it. Over time, if you see that tray in the front with the little pieces there, the conservators actually took each piece and mapped it on the barrel and knew exactly where to put those pieces back in as they were restoring this cannon. But they had to get all the loose pieces off, stabilize the metal. I don't know exactly what they did. I think it was far too late to do the electrolytic reduction kind of conservation technique. But anyway, they stabilized the metal, put it back together, filled in the gaps with whatever they filled it in with. And here's our cannon when it came back. Now, I guarantee you this cannon will be around here for several hundred years, you know, assuming we have a world that long. We still kept with the red theme. I understand that they used kind of a red oxide color or a burnt brown color, and we went with the red oxide, but it's not fire engine red. When we put our final display together, you can see on the left the 1 3-pounder in the original swivel gun in the museum. This is supposed to represent being on the bottom of the river, but the river is nothing but mud. This is kind of like a Florida spring or something like that. But anyway, give you the idea. And then on the right, we have a mock-up gunwale of a ship with a cannon and so forth, which was the third one. And I hope that y'all, when you come to see Fort Farallon in Monk's Corner, will come and visit our museum and see our cannon.